Today, I want to walk you through the steps of color marking a poem. This is a technique that I learned at an IB training to help uncover the meaning of a text, but especially when you're looking at a text and you just have no idea what to say. You have no idea whatsoever what it means. And you're staring at these words on the page and you know you have to come up with meaning, but you don't even know where to start. Color marking is a really great way to start. It's particularly useful with poetry. However, you can use it with prose too. You can use it with paragraphs and stories. You could use it with drama. You can use it with any text that's literary. It won't so much work with a textbook, but any literary text could benefit from color marking. But because poetry is so full of patterns and repetition and things like that, it's particularly useful for this. So what I want to show you first, I'm just going to go through the steps with you, talk about them a little bit, and then I'm going to model for you what it looks like on a poem so you can see kind of what color marking yields. So the very first thing that you need to do when you're color marking is to define the words in the poem. This is really not even if you're color marking, this is anytime you read a poem. You should go through and first define any words that you don't know. But I would challenge you to also go through and define words that you kind of know. There are lots of words that we have a context for, and we're pretty sure we know something about what it means. But poets are so specific in their word choice that you really benefit from just going ahead, typing it in the dictionary, and seeing what you can find out about the words that you sort of kind of know. Because poets are really clever and they're using these words very, very specifically, and they are keenly aware of the very specific dictionary definition of that word. So look it up, see what you can find out. You might also want to look at, secondary, third, fourth meanings. Poets like to do that a lot of times too because words have multiple meanings and they will play with that idea in their poetry. So don't be lazy. Go look up the words before you start the rest of this. Step 2 is to begin to look for patterns. Now, right now, you're not really having an interpretation yet. You are not looking for specific things. You just want your eyes to go over the patterns of the words on the page and start to identify some of them. So you're going to mark each pattern that you notice in a different color. It's okay for colors to overlap, and in fact, they probably will at some point. That's pretty clever. That's what smart poets do, is they use words to do multiple things. And then you want to give each color category a name. So it might be springtime words, or water diction, or alliteration. First, look for image patterns. So where are there recurring pictures? Where are there recurring sounds? Where are there recurring things that have to do with the senses, visuals for the reader? Then go through sound patterns. Do you see like alliteration, consonants? Is there a repeated K sound throughout the poem, for instance? Look for repeated structures. This can mean a lot of different things. This could be repeated sentence structures. It could be repeated stanzaic structures. Sometimes you really can make a surprising amount of meaning looking just at the structures of the stanzas. And then look for anomalies. Anomalies are things that don't fit a pattern. So perhaps you're reading the poem and there's a really interesting word or a surprising turn of phrase. Go ahead and mark it. Maybe it doesn't fit in with any pattern at all. That's okay. That also is giving you data. That is telling you something that you might be able to use as you move toward an interpretation of the poem. So when you're done color marking, you found all of the patterns you can possibly find in the whole poem. Then ask yourself some questions. Is one color predominant? If so, why might that be? Is there a shift? Is there like a progression of the colors? Say the first 3 stanzas are predominantly red, but then red almost entirely disappears from the poem and the poem becomes predominantly blue. That shows you something has changed, something has happened. And you could think about why that might be. Or maybe you'll notice that there is no progression, or there is a progression, but it's not logical. That also could tell you something you need to know about this poem. You need to think about how are these things that you've marked reinforcing the content of the passage. This is going to help you start to get toward the theme of the poem. And then think about tone or mood. Do the word patterns, the structure patterns, all of those things that you've noticed create a specific mood for the reader. And then you should try to put it all together. Now, this is obviously the harder part. However, you will have read this poem and looked at this poem really closely a lot by the time you get to the put it all together phase. Um, sometimes you try to start here. Sometimes you're like, okay, here's my interpretation. Now I'm going to find all of the stuff that supports it. This is just going at that same thing backwards. Here's all the stuff. Now, what does the stuff tell me? You're starting from the point of evidence instead of starting from the point of ideas. So when you're trying to put it all together, you don't need to account for every single solitary color that you've marked. You don't need to somehow incorporate every single thing that you've noticed. But you are trying to put puzzle pieces together here. You are trying to grab seemingly disparate pieces and weave them together into some kind of whole interpretation of the text. So I want to show you what this looks like in a poem. This is a poem that I mentioned in class would be really good for annotating, so I figured I should try it. I'm doing this live and unrehearsed for you, but I want you to kind of think about my pattern, what I'm doing. So the first thing I need to do is define things. So I would probably look up ephemeral. That's sort of a big word, so to speak. So I would look that up and try to figure out exactly what that means. It means something that doesn't last very long. It's temporary or transient. Looking through the rest of this poem, it looks like I'm pretty good on the rest of this diction. Maybe I would look up iridescent, just to know that it's sort of like see-through and also shimmery. But I'm good on defining. So now I can just start to look for patterns. So the first thing I notice is I'm looking for images, right? So I'm going to start with tree imagery, and I'm going to give it a color. I'll give it this hot pink. And every time I see words or images that have to do with trees, I'm going to mark it in this magenta color. So I have trunks of a tree, and roots of a tree. And I'm going to scroll down. And you'll notice that basically I am rereading this poem every time I look for a pattern, which is kind of cool because I'm sort of tricking myself into reading this poem multiple times, which is nice for my understanding. Okay, I think that's all of the tree imagery. Leaves. Leaves are on a tree. Okay. There's also, I'm going to call it like sky imagery. Oh, so wait. I said you need to create a code. You need to like give each color a category. So I'm going to do that just right here at the top of the poem. I'm going to say tree imagery and give it a color. This is also so that later when I have like 1 million colors, I remember what in the world I was doing here. Okay, so I have tree imagery. Now I was going to do sky imagery. So we have the wind. I guess we could also call it celestial imagery. Sky, clouds. And we have wind again, which is also particularly interesting because I think anytime a poet repeats a single word, we need to really scrutinize that word. Because poets don't do that accidentally. They're trying to find exactly the right word. So that's interesting. Here's air. Star. I want to remember to come back to star because I want to see if there's anything else that's actually astronomical and not just in the sky, but maybe not. Light, blah, blah, blah. And I might even, I'm going to go ahead and give feathers of wings that rise and fall. That to me is still celestial imagery. It's something, that takes place in the air. So I'm going to call it that because I like that new term, celestial imagery. Notice that I'm not just saying imagery. because that won't help me at all later when I have so many different kinds of imagery. Okay, what else did I notice? I want to mark things that have to do with rising and falling. Now, if I was doing this by hand, I would go ahead and just find another color and I would put, like my green highlighter on top of my blue highlighter. Digitally, it doesn't work so well and you wouldn't be able to see it. So I'm going to do words that are underlined. I'm going to call this rising and falling so that you can see where things overlap. Because where things overlap, things are getting really interesting. So I'm going to, let's see, trembling in the wind. We have brimming and falling. Something that goes up and down, rising toward us, rising and falling. Feathers of wings that rise and fall. I also could sort of put this even in a bigger category. Maybe I will italicize these things. Motion words. Remember, we could also call it diction. That's the fancy word for word choice. So trembling is a motion word. Again, brimming and falling, those are motions. If I were doing this by hand, I would be using colors for you. Vibration. Trembling, just like wind, we have this exact word repeated. Falling and falling is repeated. That's interesting. Travels toward us, rising and falling. Actually, all of this kind of is conveying motion. Cascade is conveying motion. Rise and fall, obviously, is motion. Okay. Let's see what else. I'm going to do a new color, and I'm going to call it music words. Words that could be associated with music. We might get some overlap here. And then I'm going to start to bring this to a close. String, vibration and string, those don't have to be musical, but they can be music words. Cascade of notes is musical. And obviously, like music that we breathe. Now look, a little bit of a pattern is starting to emerge here. We have all of this tree stuff, like the earth up top, and then it moves into the air and music. So they are kind of showing a pattern. I also could look at sounds like tangle of trees and twigs from branches and trunks, right? We have alliteration there. I'll mark that since I said it, alliteration. I could do so much more with sound. I could go and talk about, for a brief moment, about how it's one stanza and how maybe the fact that it's one stanza is also conveying motion, right? Like you don't stop and start, you just sort of fall straight through this poem. So what I would do if I had done everything, which I don't have time to do for you today, but if I had really done it all, then I would go through and I would say, okay, how can I put this together? How can I pull it together into one sort of cohesive thesis statement? We have a lot of stuff that goes together. We have like this sort of nature motif that goes with trees and the air and the wind and things in the sky. We might talk about the connection of nature and music. We might talk about how music is a type, music is a type of a force of nature, or is as much a force as the air that we breathe. Maybe that's what Sheila Packett is suggesting. The fancy trick I would do now is pulling this all together into a thesis statement, deciding what I want to keep, what I want to combine, what I want to get rid of. So I hope this little tutorial was helpful for you. Color marking takes some practice, but it's a really good place to start. And it also helps us notice things that we might not ordinarily notice when we start with an idea.